All right. Yeah, thank you all for joining us. Looks like we've got a pretty good attendance. Yeah, so thank you all for joining us. So today we have Alan Chan, who's a PhD student at the University of Montreal in computer science, working on primarily AI governance and alignment. So today, Alan's going to talk to us about bridging the gap as theory change for AI safety, bridging gaps for AI safety. So yeah, I'm just going to turn it over to Alan. We'll do questions at the end. We'll do just raise your hand function and I'll call on people. And Alan, you're welcome to accept questions in the middle if you like, or you can have us wait until the end, whatever you prefer. But yeah, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Cool, thanks everybody. So if you have a clarification question, feel free to raise your hand during the presentation. Otherwise, happy to discuss afterwards. So this talk is going to be about some problems I think I've observed in the AI safety community and field over the past few years and what I think we should be doing about it. I'm going to try to be a little bit spicy just because I think that maybe there should be more spicy talks, and the more like old I get / more into this field I am, I think I should try to point out some problems. So first, a little bit more about me. So I'm a PhD student at Mila. I've been working a lot with David Kruger, especially the past year in Cambridge. I mainly focus on three kinds of things in my research. The first is technical model evaluations for catastrophic risk. The second is making various kinds of cases for socio-technical AI risks and AI safety. And the last is thinking about what kind of policy we need to manage AI risks. So let's get right into the talk. I think there are kind of two big problems with AI safety, and definitely the problems have been getting better over the past year or so, but they still exist to a large extent. The first is I think the AI safety community by and large has a much too technical view of the problem. In particular, I think a lot of people think that technical alignment is basically the only problem that needs to be solved. And once it's solved, we sort of automatically have a good world. The second problem is I think the AI safety community is also tended to be quite insular, much more the technical AI safety community than the AI governance community. But I think this insularity has had some pretty bad consequences. What kinds of consequences? So first is, I think the AI safety problem is actually not just about technical alignment. It's super complex. It involves complex interactions with society. The second is that as a result of the two problems that I just talked about, the AI safety community has a bunch of potential blind spots, which ends up making it less effective at getting what we all want, which is a society that is running well with increasingly advanced AI systems. So let's talk a little bit about the first problem. So I think there's this implicit or explicit assumption that I get talking to a lot of people in the AI safety, particularly the technical alignment community, that kind of the only problem that matters is figuring out rogue AI, or how exactly do we get an AI to pursue our goals reliably. I think this is certainly an important problem, but I think there are also two very big classes of problems we shouldn't forget about. The first is misuse, so somebody using an advanced AI system to construct a biological or chemical weapon. And the second is this big class of problems known as structural risks or collective action problems. So these types of situations, it's not exactly the case that an individual person is misusing an AI system. It's also not exactly the case that an AI system is acting in an out of control way. Rather, it's more so the flavor of coordination problems. So you have things like geopolitical instability, like the negative externalities from massive unemployment. If we don't have something like a UBI, the gradual erosion of control as we integrate increasingly advanced AI systems into our society without enough human oversight. So clearly there are like a huge bunch of problems, and we don't necessarily want to be focusing just on rogue AI problems. But even if we were to focus just on rogue AI problems, I still think that a focus on technical solutions to AI safety isn't really enough, mainly because of my picture of alignment. So I think there's this narrative a lot of the time that alignment is this thing that is like to be solved. And it's this problem that we can operationalize and formalize and eventually have some sort of proof or really high confidence guarantee that we can solve it. I think this is certainly possible, and we should definitely try to do work to figure out to what extent we can actually do this. But by default, it seems to me that by picture, like alignment right now is more like this kind of picture, where you have two bars. You have this alignment bar, which is in green, and this capabilities bar, which is in red. So what we want is for the alignment bar, in particular, our alignment techniques, to be ahead of the capabilities bar. If not, then models might be more capable than our alignment technique. So a model might be able to deceive us or otherwise trick our interpretability tools, for example, if they're not good enough. So of course, we can try to push up the alignment bar by doing technical alignment research. And this is indeed what a lot of people are doing. But the problem is that there are a lot of competitive pressures pushing up the red bar, in particular arms race dynamics, that make it more difficult to address the situation. So even in this world in which rogue AI is like the only problem, it still seems we should think about other problems, other solution methods besides technical methods. So that's why I think the problem of AI safety is pretty complex and socio-technical. The second reason we should care about the AI safety community being too insular and being too technical minded is potential blind spots. So here's one example of potential blind spot. I think a story that people, I think when we're going out and trying to tell people why they should care about AI safety, we tell this kind of story about having a really advanced AI and like catastrophe. And like, we somehow have to draw this causal link between having a really, really good AI and some catastrophe happening. So of course, this causal link has to go through society, right? Because we're going to be deploying this AI into society, and it's going to like interact with already existing societal systems. But it's actually kind of unclear how exactly this AI is going to interact with like society, just because it's so complicated. And in a lot of the threat models and like, risk stories that people tell, there's definitely a lot of oversimplification. So this oversimplification is, I think, basically inevitable, given that we're trying to, for the past like 10 years or so, we've been trying to construct risk stories from scratch. But the problem with this, like not having these causal links and question marks is that we end up sounding pretty unconvincing to other people when we're trying to explain AI risk stories. So, whenever I talk to my friends and I'm like, AI is getting wild, and they're like, oh, like, I kind of like intuitively believe this because the super intelligence could be really dangerous, but like, can you give me like a concrete causal story? And, I sort of say something about disempowerment and like AI systems being increasingly integrated in society, but there are just a lot of causal links missing here that make the thing less convincing overall. So I think it's important to develop these causal links to like make our stories more convincing and just to make the case better. But the second reason I think we need to develop these causal links better is as potential interventions. So I sort of like to have a Swiss cheese model of like addressing risks. So I think there are probably going to be a lot of potential interventions that we can take to reduce the risks of like deploying an advanced AI system. I think there's maybe this implicit assumption that like a super intelligence is going, or like the first AI we build is going to be some god. I think this is possible, but it still seems that we should try to like implement mitigation measures that we can. So for example, if we believe that a plausible risk story is an AGI taking advantage of like weak links in our biosecurity chain, maybe we should shore up that biosecurity chain so that we can reduce the risk of a catastrophe or like increase the probability that we're able to catch something bad before it happens. So the third problem when, given the AI safety community's historical insularity and technical like focus is decreased influence. So I just think the AI safety community has just been less effective than it otherwise could have been at getting things done, in particular, getting policies and norms out there to actually change things and make things safer on the ground. So, recently there's been a lot of like stuff, a lot of opposition to like existential risk and stuff, especially in light of the case letter and the FI letter. It still sort of remains to be seen what the net impact of this is, but it kind of seems like it'd be better if like people didn't hate us. Another point I think that's maybe undervalued is there are actually a lot of people doing really relevant things outside the AI safety community, like auditing, that'd be really useful for all the things that we care about. But to the extent that like people hate us or don't want to associate with the AI safety community, that means fewer potential collaborations to push forward this important work. Okay, so those are the three problems. If you buy this, well, what should we do about this, right? I think this is sort of still an open question, but here's just some basic thoughts about what to do about this. The first thing is, okay, there are these bunch of people, they maybe work in different fields, they maybe care about slightly different things. Like, what should we do to like address the problems of, not having enough contact with these people and also this like perception problem? Well, the first thing seems maybe kind of obvious is like, these people also have their own gatherings where they talk about things that they care about. Like, it seems like we should go to these conferences and just talk to these people and try to connect like what we're doing in AI safety to the things that they're worrying about, and try to frame our problems in light of the tools that they have in their field. And to a large extent, I think PIBBSS is already doing this, but I think it'd be great if there were like 10 more PIBBSS or something. And like also, more people went to other conferences to try to talk about AI safety. The next sort of thing we should do is maybe just like, once we're at these conferences, just like make friends with these people. I think a pretty like interesting, probably a pretty good way to like get more collaborations done and get more work done in AI safety is just to like have personal connections, so that it's not just through Twitter that you're talking with other people about AI safety. It's also sort of in-person interaction, so you have more nuance. And the end goal, of course, is like us working together with everybody else to push forward AI safety research and policy. So briefly, I just want to talk about some objections to, I think, my whole line of thinking so far. I think there are mainly two that I've heard from people that I've talked to. The first is, okay, it's very nice and all to try to work with other people and try to get like a more, much less technical view and much less insular view of the problem. But these people care about different things. We care about reducing existential risk, or maybe S risk, or like something else. Maybe just by working with them, we end up diluting our work. So I guess this seems unconvincing to me for two reasons. One is because it doesn't seem like the AI safety community at large has tried engaging to a large extent up until maybe like a year or even a few months ago with other fields. The second is that I think there's just a lot of room to do common work that we haven't explored yet, like in auditing or interpretability or pushing forward other kinds of policies. So it seems like, there's a lot of things we should try before discounting this sort of thing. The second type of objection I've heard from people is prioritization. So this argument is something like, okay, so we really care about existential risk here. These other people, they care about things like fairness, they care about justice. Like these are important, but not as important as existential risk. So maybe we shouldn't engage with these people. I think this is also a little misguided because there are a lot of things that we should actually care about in the world. I think injustice and inequality are really, really important. And it'd be kind of a shame if we like averted catastrophic risks, but end up with a really shit society because our policies inadvertently ended up exacerbating concentrations of power. So at the end of the day, we just have some big corporation controlling the AGI. It seems that like there are a lot of problems and we should collaborate with other people to try to address these problems. So I'm going to talk about all of this in the context of my experience in the past couple of months / half a year trying to do this kind of bridging work with the FACT community. So yeah, I guess most of you are aware, like there's just a lot of bad blood between the FACT / AI ethics community. FACT stands for Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency. So the FACT and AI ethics people and like the AI safety people, especially on Twitter, to some extent also, when you're just talking to people in real life, there's just tends to be a little bit of animosity. And this animosity is centered around things like whether we should be focusing on long-term harms or short-term harms, whether there are like real or imaginary risks that we should talk about. Some of it is also focused on like, what people associated with the ASAP movement have said in the past few decades, and like their positions on other issues like race. I think a lot of this bad blood is also exasperated because a lot of the discourse is happening on Twitter right now, which tends to not to be the greatest place for like really civil and productive discourse. So this is a really big shame, I think, because there's a lot that I think, one, the AI safety community can contribute to what people in FACT and AI ethics care about, and what people who do like FACT and AI ethics stuff can contribute to reducing catastrophic risks from AI systems. So in terms of the first thing, I think like to the extent that we do prosaic alignment, this is just a really big area of commonality between the two groups. Like it seems that the same techniques, so far at least with our current systems, techniques that you use to align systems to make them not do power seeking or manipulate you, are also useful for reducing toxicity and reducing reducing the incidence of racial slurs, for instance. So this is like a really good point of collaboration. Another point of collaboration is like interpretability, which is useful for both things as well. And there's also sort of policy stuff like auditing. So I just think there's a lot of potential for people on both in the AI safety circle and the FACT circle to collaborate much more. So like, what is actually going on, right? Is this bad blood going to persist or not? So it's sort of unclear just from getting like a read of, like if you just read Twitter, I think it's not clear whether things are moving at all, really. And I'm not sure if this is really going to change, because on Twitter, it's mostly the people who are the most vocal, expressing sort of the views on ASAP and on fact. But I think there are some reasons to be somewhat hopeful. So I actually went to fact this year, which was in Chicago 2-ish weeks ago. There was this like sort of bridging dinner organized by some people who wanted to bridge gaps between people in the AI safety community and people in the fact and AI ethics community. And this bridge dinner actually went quite well. I think just like talking to a lot of people and like presenting sort of like a reasonable case for AI safety, especially based upon like empirical evidence, was really useful. And something that actually surprised me was at one point I was talking to a bunch of people about why I thought that existential risk was a concern. And what ended up happening was that, one of my big reasons is just like the empirical results that we've gotten in the last 5 years, like grokking, like emerging capabilities, scaling, like generality from like GPT 3 and 4, all this kind of stuff, right? And to some extent also just like emergent world models, language models being able to do things just like in really weird and unexpected ways. And what surprised me was that like after communicating this to a bunch of people at this event, like they were just like very, very, maybe not totally convinced, but like certainly pushed much more in the direction of caring about existential safety and catastrophic risk. I guess I hadn't really figured that this would kind of be surprising to them, but I think it sort of makes sense. Like, even if you're a machine learning person, if you've been focusing on thinking about mitigating ongoing harms from AI systems, then like maybe you're not following like, you're not following all the frontier developments in machine learning. So I think there's just a lot of potential for just going to places where people are and just reasonably explaining the case based on evidence. Seems to be useful. So that's like one positive update. Another positive update is at the Try workshop, there was a sort of few sessions centered around this idea of bridging gaps between AI safety and the fact community. I think this was also moderately positive, and there are also plans to sort of put out a shared research agenda between the two circles. So I think things are maybe going to go well in the near future. I'm going to pause for a little bit and check the chat to see if there are any questions, I guess. No, okay. This might have been a connection issue, but maybe it's fine now. Cool. All right. So let's continue. So these events, this is one way to connect, to bridge the gap between the ASAP community and the fact community. Another way that I've been working on in the past little while is this paper we had accepted to fact, where we presented, we tried to synthesize what AI safety people and what like fact people think about AI risk in terms of agency. So why do we choose to focus on agency here? So I think there's a story that a lot of people tell about agentic AI systems that cause disempowerment and eventually catastrophe. And I think this is a pretty compelling story because agency seems to be one thing that distinguishes the AI systems we're building from the technologies that we've had in the past, just like regular old software. So I think like being able to make the case for existential risk or catastrophe based on agency seems to be pretty important. But the problem is that there's a lot of uncertainty, at least in the public, about what agency actually means. And in particular, I think there's a lot of opposition, especially from people in the fact community, but even using the word agency or agentic and the reasons they give are something like, using this as anthropomorphic, or it like advocates responsibility of people designing AI systems. So what we wanted to do with our work at FACT was to reclaim the word agency to be able to use and actually, tell convincing risk stories of. So given this concept of agency, I think it's much easier to elaborate pathways to harms so that, we can do the two things that I mentioned at the beginning, which is convince other people of the harms of the systems we're building, and also identify potential ways of mitigating AI risk. And the second is once we have the concept of agency, I just think it's easier to talk about public discussion, talk about AI risk in public. I find often when I'm talking to people who have never heard about AI before, I really want to use the word agentic, but like they don't really know what it means. And like before sort of our work, it was very hard to find like a paper to point to in like, an academic setting where I could say, yes, this is like what I mean by agency, and this is the harms that could occur. That's what we wanted to do with our paper. In the last little bit, I'll just talk a little bit, give a brief overview of our paper. and then like close off with some other thoughts. So, what do we end up defining agency as? So agency is this like really tricky thing. I think instead of saying that we like gave a definition once for all, I think how we thought of it was agency is more this thing, it's more this direction that's characterized by 4 properties. What are these properties? The first is under specification. So this is the degree to which, when you want an AI system to accomplish a goal, like how much low-level specification of the task do you give the AI system? The second is directives of impact. So like how much impact does that AI system have on the actual world? Like that's not mediated through a human. The third is the extent to which the AI system acts in a goal-directed way. And the third is the ability of the AI system to do long-term planning. So just to talk a little bit more about all these properties, I'm going to go through a quick example. So suppose you want to write a paper and submit it to a conference. Well, first in this process, you're probably going to do a literature review. So you go on your favorite search engine, you find papers from some sites, you put them into your Zotero, you put them in Google Docs, you write about them, and then you repeat this loop until you're satisfied. So how might a system that is agentic actually do this entire task for you? So suppose you have a system like AutoGPT, which is just GPT-4 changed together, and you give it the goal of write me a literature review on bias and text vision models. So the system would be underspecified because all you're doing is giving it, is telling it to write a literature review without telling it exactly how to write that literature review or what kinds of papers to select. The system would also have a direct impact because it's like actually writing the literature review instead of telling you how to write the literature review. It'd be goal directed because you literally just gave it the goal, and to the extent that it's able to accomplish the task, it'd be goal directed. And this task would also probably require some long-term planning because the process of writing literature review just takes like quite a long time. So that's agency in a nutshell. In the rest of our work, we talk about the incentives that people have to build agentic systems, including economic, cultural, and regulatory incentives, potential harms from agentic systems, I think inspired by a lot of the disempowerment stories that people have been talking about in AI safety for a very long time, which also mentioned like systemic and delayed harms, and also harms yet to be identified, given that there's a lot of uncertainty over the capabilities of AI systems, and like we've observed properties like reward hacking and goal misgeneralization. And finally, we discussed in the paper paths to preventing harms or mitigating the harms from agentic systems, including monitoring, not building agentic systems in the first place, and having much more public control and oversight. So I think this work was a relative success at fact. People did seem to like it, and it was accepted at the end of the day. So I guess something that was interesting though was that when they gave us our paper slot, they ended up putting us in this section like normative philosophy in AI, which was like kind of weird, and I don't know, I guess it sort of fit, but definitely I think decreased like the amount of engagement that we had over the paper. So I don't know, I think the engagement so far has been positive, but I'm very curious to see whether like when more and more people read the paper, what the engagement will be like. So as for future work on this paper, like since we have this idea of agentic AI now, I think it'd be really good for other people to try to tease out the causal links between an agentic AI and catastrophe. And this is actually one big reason why we ended up submitting this to FACT as well. It's because I think like a lot of people in the FACT community have a lot of expertise in understanding how AI systems are deployed right now and like how they cause serious consequences right now. It seems like it'd be really good for like us to build upon that kind of knowledge to try to tease out causal links for how agentic systems could cause harms in the near future. Potentially, like deploying an agentic system into an already existing application, like giving out loans or like the criminal justice system, could be a path to catastrophe. So I'd really like to see more work on this. The second thing is, given that we have like a concept of agency, like it'd be really good if people tried to measure this, and in particular try to understand what kinds of techniques that we're using tend to build agentic systems. So that's our paper. I want to end with saying a little bit more about moving forward with other communities. I guess for me, like I have this prior that it's really good to cooperate with people. Like I think there's almost always more room to cooperate, especially since we haven't like done a lot of cooperation in the past. And the problems we're facing are just seem like incredibly challenging. Like it's not just about alignment, it's also about it's not just about having alignment techniques, it's also about getting people to work together to agree to use those alignment techniques and have the necessary safeguards in place to make sure those alignment techniques don't fail. So I think it's really important, that we all cooperate and be nice to each other and be friends with each other to try to solve really hard problems. Thank you and happy to discuss.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. That was really great. I enjoyed that. I have questions myself, but I want to turn it over to our participants first and give the current fellows an opportunity to ask a question. So yeah, if anyone has a question, just raise your hand and I will call on you. I think, yeah, and I think I have the permission to allow you to talk. So we'll start with Simon. Go for it, Simon.
Hey, hi. Thanks very much for that. I'm really excited to hear about your view on socio-technical problems and the importance of engaging with other communities. I'll take the opportunity to plug the alignment workshop at A-Life 2023 this year. So we're trying to engage with the A-Life community at that event. But I guess I'd like to just raise a slightly skeptical, viewpoint on whether the agentic features that you've described are really very well defined. I think that they're still problematic. In particular, I think it's really quite difficult to say what one means by goal-directed behavior or long-term planning in ways that don't actually presuppose a kind of folk psychological set of assumptions about what agency is and what sorts of systems engage in those activities. I guess I was also a little surprised when you said that the system that writes a report has a direct impact, which is not mediated through humans, because I'd kind of assumed that things that had, things that we might think of as having purely textual outputs, all of the impact that they have on the physical world is mediated, or most of the impact that they have on the kind of, the non-human technosphere is mediated through humans. There aren't at the moment any robots going out reading reports and then, ploughing fields in particular ways. Does that make any sense? That's rather a lot to interject, but that's sorry. Those are the comments that I have.
Yeah, thanks. So the direct action thing was the second thing. What was the first thing you mentioned about the agency definition?
So I think the notions of goal-directed behavior and long-term planning, they're quite contested.
Yeah.
And certainly there are a lot of cognitive scientists who would say, okay, well, how do I tell whether a cuttlefish is doing long-term planning? So if I can't tell whether a cuttlefish is doing it, how do I tell whether an even more alien system, namely an AI, is doing it?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. There's still a lot of that ambiguity, even with the sort of sub-characteristics of agency that we propose. So on long-term planning, I think yes. So maybe I should have said one of the goals of our sort of characterization of agency was more focusing on behaviorally what we could eventually measure from an AI system. So in terms of long-term planning, I think we were thinking mainly two sorts of lines of evidence. One is being able to perform tasks that seem to require being able to act over a long time horizon. And two is using interpretability tools to look into the actual computations that a model is doing. So right now, we already sort of know from the emergent world models paper that language models have world models. It seems like not that much of a stretch that we can use our tools to see if language models are actually using these models, these represented world models to do planning. So like that's, I guess, where we're coming from with long-term planning.
Okay.
Yeah, with the direct action thing, yeah, I think actually, yeah, I agree with you that this sort of text thing example is like not very direct action-y. I guess maybe there are two senses of direct action. So in the sense of direct action is like in the context of the goal, I guess. Like if the goal is to like, well, yeah, there might be some sort of hierarchical thing going on. Maybe I'll like send you a message about this a little bit after. Maybe a little hard to form right now, my thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much.
But thanks, yeah. Yeah, there are like two questions in the QA. So from Thomas, your definition of agency is missing a notion of normative evaluation of the positive or negative impact of goals. I'm interested to view this as not essential. I guess I don't right now, because I think in choosing our characteristics, we were motivated by what things could like cause a catastrophe, but I'm interested in hearing why you think the normative evaluation stuff you mentioned is important, if you want to say something about it.
Yeah, I've allowed Thomas to unmute themselves if they'd like to speak, but I don't know if they're available to speak. Oh, you're in the library.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to like, yeah, you feel free to type something. I'm also happy to like respond to a message in the Slack later. Yeah, I'm really interested in hearing why you think that thing is important.
So we can, I think Gabrielle had their hand up first. So before the next question came in, so I'm gonna allow them to talk if they'd like to.
Gabe, you're not muted, but we cannot hear you.
Hello?
There we go.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Yeah, so so my question is about sort of what the implications of your critique are for people that are sort of coming from outside the AI safety world, and sort of what role we can play in bridging this gap. So let's say, for the sake of argument, for the sake of discussion, that you guys have successfully persuaded, indoctrinated, whatever, me into believing that we should take, you know, catastrophic AI alignment risk very seriously. But still, like, I have a choice as to how to present myself, right, in my work. And, you know, is there a way to do that helps bridge the gap, as opposed to like presenting it as like coming from this AI safety perspective? And so, you know, I'm just curious how you think about that.
So are you asking about like, you are coming from an outside field and like you've been convinced about AI safety or something, and you're wondering what you should, like, how you should frame your
I have a choice as to
or...
whether to present my work as like AI safety work in some sense, or just like as, or in some other way that, like, you know, like I'm writing a paper about AI liability. I could frame it like very tightly around like mitigating catastrophic risk, right? Or I could frame it as like, we have this problem that, like, you know, maybe there's some, you know, there's different ways to do it that are designed to appeal different audiences. And I think there's trade-offs there. I'm just curious, in light of your critique here, how you think about that. Yeah, but I want it to be broader than just my project.
Right. Yeah, thanks. So I guess I don't have like a great answer, but I have, I think, a number of considerations that affect how I frame my projects, and maybe this will be helpful. So the first is like, I think it's important to be honest, like intellectually about what you're doing. So when we were writing this paper, I really didn't want it to come across as, we're just talking about AI safety, but in coded language. Like I really wanted to engage deeply with what the fact community was saying, and like with their previous work. And I think that ended up making the paper like a lot more grounded, which is good. So that can affect the framing. The second thing is, I guess, the intended audience. Like, I could imagine that a paper might just be much more effective if it's not framed as coming from the AI safety community. The third thing is it might even be good long-term to have like a bunch of works like not framed in terms of catastrophic risk and not coming from the AI safety community, but like having sort of beneficial effects for catastrophic risk anyway. Like, I think like there is, yeah, I don't want to say like, I don't want to say stranglehold. It's like not much of a stranglehold. It's more like, I think they're very prevalent ideas over like what AI risk are and what kinds of AI risk are important in the AI safety community. And it's not that they're necessarily wrong, but I think there just needs to be probably much more like rigorous challenging of these ideas, or like a different perspective based on these ideas. And it seems like these different perspectives are more likely to be developed if there is like almost like a catastrophic risk type literature, but like adjacent to the community. That was a lot. Hopefully that is like coherent.
Sure, we'll follow up about this offline, but that's helpful.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think we could turn to Giles's question. I'll also permit them to speak if they want to.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, so I guess you can read my question there. I guess you might be doing both things. You might think that agency involves a lot of stuff. Some features of agency seem to be more salient when we're thinking about risk. Others not so much. How come you settled on these four? Because you think they're kind of central to understanding that, like, how agency works in AI, or because you're interested in like what specific aspects of or things we associate with agency seem to have the highest kind of risk profile?
Yeah, so it's definitely more the first than the second. So we spent a really long time actually. So we actually settled on the characteristics much in advance. We spent a long time figuring out or debating about what kind of word to use, whether we should use agency or another word. So it is a little bit of the second to the extent that we use the word agency. But where I'm coming from is I wanted to use the word agency basically because of how it's used in reinforcement learning. Like my background, like my master's was in reinforcement learning. And I guess like that's how I understood agent to be used. And I guess I really wanted to be able to use the word agent in the reinforcement learning sense and not in any other sense, and having it sort of understood by people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. So just to be, this is helpful for me to know too. So these four criteria are kind of what reinforcement learning people are thinking of when they think of when they describe these systems as agents. Is that right? Or is it controversial?
It's not controversial. So I would say like we elaborated a little bit on what the reinforcement learning people are saying, but it's like in my mind essentially what a reinforcement learning agent is about. So there's like a slightly different emphasis, especially in the sort of, I would say, hard RL or like extreme RL camp, where there's just like a lot of extra stuff about like learning from your own sensory observations and like interacting with the world on a continual basis. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of overlap there.
Okay, thanks.
I want to pause and see if anyone else has a question. If not, then I'm going to ask a question. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and ask my question. Thanks, Alan. I think I have a little bit more of just some things, some comments, and then I just want to hear your reaction. So there's not necessarily a direct question, although as I speak, maybe a direct question is going to come out. So yeah, I spent a lot of time as a philosophy PhD student. I spent a lot of time with the more AI ethics crowd and get a lot of hostility when I want to talk about AI agency or alignment or risk, so on and so forth. So I'm, sort of familiar with a lot of these challenges. And two things that I wanted to like focus on in this sort of comment question, whatever it is, from your talk was this idea that, the sort of causal link from AI to catastrophe is sort of mediated through society in some way. And there's a kind of question as to like, what are those causal mechanisms? And we want to try to specify how AI is going to be mediated through society in whatever way to lead to catastrophe. And so, one of the things that's really like that the AI ethics crowd is like really concerned with is how AI might contribute to exacerbating inequality, exacerbating systemic racism, so on and so forth. And so the second point I wanted to make was in this response to Simon's question. Simon was kind of concerned whether or not there was actually, whether or not the impact is not clearly not mediated through humans. And so Simon was like thinking in terms of GPT, like that, right, that it has to go through sort of a language output. But there's also a sense in which it's mediated through humans just through the data. And any sort of, machine learning agent we're going to come up with is going to be mediated through humans, at least through the data, right? What it's trained on and so on and so forth. And so for the AI ethics people, this is like one of the mechanisms responsible for exacerbating inequality, systemic racism, et cetera. So what I'm wondering is, in trying to like specify these causal mechanisms that go from AI to catastrophe, it seems to me like it would be really helpful to try to bridge the gaps between these communities if we can tell a story that leads to some sort of societal or existential risk that really brings into the fold the problems they're concerned with, right? Like how could, on our way towards existential risk, catastrophe, so on and so forth, on the way, it seems like there's a really plausible story, at least to me, that we're going to exacerbate inequality, systemic racism, et cetera. And so, yeah, I mean, it just seems to me like that's really, those are like some specifics that we really want to try to, like now speaking from someone, kind of thinking of myself as in the alignment community, those are some of the specifics that I think that we want to get out and sort of connect that path to catastrophe with all of the concerns about like exacerbating inequality and systemic racism. So yeah, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that, or like people that working on that, et cetera.
Yeah, so I don't think enough people are working on this, but I 100% agree. Like we need more people on this. Yeah, like a sort of proto story I've really liked that I think ties in this sort of like existential risk stuff and also like inequality stuff is just like capitalism, but worse. As we increasingly integrate AI systems into society, and like it's actually not like that much different, I think, from multinational corporations getting increasing power over the last couple of decades, like increasing financialization of like a bunch of our services, and like already I think a lot of people feel like they just don't have that much control over their lives. So I think like one, we need to like say like, okay, this is bad, and like how could it get worse with AI, like much worse. And yeah, so the people working on this, I don't know, I do know that some people have tried to tell this story to varying degrees of detail. So Andrew Critch is one person. Most recently in his what was it, a taxonomy of catastrophic risks or something like this, where the acronym is TASRA, TASRA. So this is like a good start. Some other people who are interested in Toby Shevlin is also interested in this. But yeah, I think there's just like there needs to be much more engagement with sort of the documentation of like inequality that we have right now, and that is to some extent exacerbated by our current algorithmic systems. Yeah, and two, just like there need to be more. I think it needs to be much more fleshed out right now than where it is at. So yeah, I mean, if anybody's interested in this sort of thing, I'd be very interested in chatting with you and like potentially working on this in the near future. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That was great. Just a few follow-ups. What was the Toby? How do you spell that last name?
Oh, Toby Shevlin. So I don't think he has anything like published on this. I've just like talked to him about this extensively, and I think like he's definitely interested. Oh, I think also David Kruger as well is like this is sort of his main failure mode.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, I like what you said, capitalism but worse, because I think perhaps if the alignment community just sort of used the word capitalism more often with a negative connotation, that would fill the gaps, because I think a lot of the AI ethics people, this is sort of their concern, and I think their worry is that there's not enough like criticism of the capitalist status quo, which I mean, for the reasons you stated, I don't think is necessarily true. Because I think, at least there's a subset of the community that's understanding it as like capitalism, but worse. But yeah, I think maybe using that word with more frequently with negative connotation could help bridge some gaps. And then oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like I think there's this maybe third thing that the third problem I didn't mention was, I guess I maybe sort of mentioned, just like techno optimism. And I think like, I think it's understandable to be optimistic about the development of an AGI. Like certainly there seem to be things in our society that are bottlenecked by cognitive labor, in particular like education and healthcare. But I think like there hasn't really been that much work actually in understanding like how an AGI could actually help with these issues. And I think if OpenAI, for instance, is making claims that like, okay, like developing this AGI is for the good of humanity, I think they have to do like a lot more work in actually providing evidence of this, and in particular drawing out causal chains and saying, okay, like, we have an AGI that can do X, this is how it's going to alleviate problem Y in this domain. That'd be like a lot more convincing, and I think would also do a lot to quell the sort of opposition from people that just think that everybody who cares about AI safety is just like naive.
Right.
But yeah, you're gonna say, yeah.
I was just going to plug one of our upcoming speaker events. I don't think it is until, let me check really quickly. It is August 14th at noon Eastern time. But it's another Alan Love, who's a philosopher of biology who's been working on concepts of biological agency for a long time. And he's got a very interdisciplinary groups, very similar to PIBBSS, except more focused on the philosophy of biology, where they're trying to ask questions like, what do we mean by agency? And there's a lot of work that they're doing. So yeah, he's going to give a talk to PIBBSS on sort of challenges for how we should, be thinking about agency, and like conceptual challenges in using the word agency in biology, which is sort of related to using the word agency in AI. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you if you'd be interested, and then also share it with our participants to hopefully get them excited about an upcoming talk.
Sounds super relevant.
Yeah, it's really cool work. I think it's really exciting. I mean, that's what PIBBSS is, a lot of what PIBBSS is trying to do. Draw these connections between the natural sciences and AI.
Yeah, I think there should be a PIBBSS in every major city.
Yeah, yeah, that would be really cool. So yeah, just pause a minute, see if there's any last minute questions. Oh, it looks like unless Giles' hand is just up from earlier. Yeah, I think talking's permitted if you had another question.
Yeah, I did have one more question. So you kind of are highlighting various harms and risks that can come from agential AI. Did you also think about maybe how more agential AI could maybe mitigate or reduce certain failure modes that particularly the fact people are interested in? I mean, I don't know if maybe they think that having more agential AI might solve responsibility gaps or things like that. I don't know. Yeah, just be interested to hear if you got into that stuff.
So I didn't. But yeah, I'm interested in hearing. Yeah, like, do you think like more agentic AI would be helpful for accountability gaps?
I think it comes down to if you think that they have the right kind of agency to attribute responsibility to them for their actions. Because right now, I think the weirdness about it is that we don't feel comfortable being like, oh, that was the algorithm's fault. We want like a human, because we don't really think that they are agents in the moral sense. But if they're like more agenty in, then like in the more high flown sense that maybe the fact people are thinking of agents, and that's why they don't want to assign these things to the status of agency to reinforcement learners. Maybe that's because they associate it with moral agency. But maybe if we got to that point that we actually were more comfortable assigning moral agency to these things, then we could just start blaming them and jailing them or whatever.
Yeah, so I guess that there are a couple of things here. The first is that we really try to stay away from moral agency in our work, just because I think it's just like a very touchy topic in the fact community. So our focus was more like almost behavioral agency, I guess, if that's a term. Like we sort of emphasize that, like, even if we call these systems agentic, like there are still people choosing to build these systems, so we can like hold them accountable. The second thing is, yeah, I'm not sure about this line of argument that, like, we solve this accountability gap just by jailing these agents. I guess like maybe eventually, to the extent that like we have like a good enough alignment solution, and like AI systems are just like acting like regular people in society and respond to incentives. I think yes. Yeah, I guess I don't have too many developed thoughts on this though.
Cool. And did you have any other? So could you maybe talk a little bit more about which specific like issues that people in fact have like already brought up that you think actually agency plays a role in this particular problem or that particular problem, and maybe just draw out how you think that works a bit more?
Are you asking like what kinds of problems the fact community has studied for which like agency is?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like of the problems that they've raised with existing algorithms and so on, which of those do you think actually involve or are exacerbated by like more agentic systems?
Yeah, so I think potentially all of them. So like I think didn't do enough to draw out the causal links, as I was saying earlier. The two main things we sort of talked about, one was anything sort of like a recommender system where long-term delayed impacts are really important. That's a case where it seems that like the better the system is at doing long-term planning, the worse potentially for society in terms of like the effects that the system could have, could be way subtler and could be like much harder to detect over a longer time horizon. The second was, yeah, almost in some sense like a little dissatisfying, because I think the causal links still need to be much more described, but this idea of like a concentration of power. So like even if so assuming that like you're reasonable enough at doing alignment such that a corporation can just use an agentic AI system without it going out of control. Well, like the whole sort of thing with agency is that like you're able to just let it go without much human oversight. So to the extent that like your system is much better at a task than a human, and also like is much faster than a human, like you just outcompete anything that is not being automated. And depending on sort of like the structure of AI development, like right now it seems to be like mostly controlled by just like a few large companies. Those large companies could get like a lot of power, and this is just like the classic sort of like worries about the concentration of power in the fact community.
Cool, that's really interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, Gabe, did you have another question?
Oh, I just wanted to comment on Giles' comment, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I was thinking about like your point about models, AI systems taking on moral agency, and I'm curious sort of what the implications of that are. So it strikes me that like with parents of children, as like children take on like more agency as they get older, we do like sever parents, at least their legal responsibility, and to a large extent I think their moral responsibility for their children's actions. But I think that is maybe because we think like new humans on average have like net positive externalities, and I wonder if like that makes sense for AI systems. What like if they are agentic and we can hold them responsible and maybe jail them if that's effective, whatever. Is your contention that would justify sort of severing the creators, deployers of those systems moral or legal responsibility? Because my intuitions don't run that way, and I'm curious what you think about that.
Are you asking me or Alan?
You, but Alan can weigh in too.
All right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not. Yeah, I think I'm also skeptical. I was just wondering, because I thought this is like one possible way to get the facts people interested in, like not just the negatives of agentic AI, but maybe we need to like shape it in a more agency way in certain directions. I don't know. So I'm not like that convinced by the idea myself, and I think that
Okay.
I think I share your. Actually, I think I like your point, and yeah, like it does seem different to create another agent if it's not like there seems to be a lot going on with creating humans that makes it different to making an agent that has maybe inherits more of your values or your goals from the way that you've designed it, and that in a way that we just don't have with children, because they kind of develop their own values to a large extent. So maybe there's differences there. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I don't know what to say really.
Do you want to weigh in on that, Alan?
I don't know. I think my intuition is also it's probably not worth right now splitting responsibility with AI systems, but I guess I'm open to this changing in the future.
Yeah, so unless there's any last minute questions, yeah, thank you for joining us, Alan. It was a really good discussion.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
See you.
See you.